Dear students, in this class we are going to discuss The Portrait of a Lady by KHUSHWANT Singh. If we talk about the author, KHUSHWANT Singh, one of the best known Indian writers of all times, was born in 1915 in Hadali, which is now in Pakistan. He was educated at the Government College Lahore and at King's College, Cambridge University, and the Inner Temple in London. He practiced law at the Lahore High Court for several years before joining the Indian Ministry of External Affairs in 1947. He began a distinguished career as a journalist with the All India Radio in 1951. Since then, he has been founder editor of Yojana, that is 1951 to 1953, editor of the Illustrated Weekly of India from 1979 to 1980, chief editor of New Delhi 1979 to 1980, and the editor of the Hindustan Times 1980 to 1983. His Saturday column with malice towards one and all in the Hindustan Times is by far one of the most popular columns of the day. Even today we miss him in this regard. Among the several works he published are a classic 2-volume history of the Sikhs, several novels, the best known of which are Delhi, The Train to Pakistan, and The Company of Women, and a number of translations and non-fiction books on Delhi, nature and current affairs. The Library of Congress has 99 works on and by KHUSHWANT Singh. Now, talking about the theme of this lesson, The Portrait of a Lady, is the story of the author himself. He describes his relationship with his grandmother over the years. He pens down her daily activities and how she evolved as a character as times passed by. He explains her appearance, which helps create an image in the reader's mind. Now, talking about the genre of this, piece of art, we can say yes, it is part of his autobiography, not his whole life, but then yes, we can consider because it is written by him and about himself, his own relation with his grandma. So the difference between biography and autobiography, I would like to make it very clear here to the audiences. Biography is if the story of life is written by somebody else. Autobiography if the story of life is written by the person himself or herself. Now talking about the lesson, let's understand the lesson text. My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. She had been old and wrinkled for 20 years that I had known her. People said that she had once been young and pretty and had even had a husband, but that was hard to believe. My grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. He wore a big turban and loose-fitting clothes. His long white beard covered the best part of his chest, and he looked at least 100 years old. He did not look the sort of person who would have a wife or children. This is something, he talks about his grandfather, the image that he saw in the portrait. That's what he believed, that it was, unbelievable for a person like him to have a family. He did not look the sort of person who would have a wife or children. And he looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. As for my grandmother, being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. She often told us of the games she used to play as a child. That seemed quite absurd and undignified on her part, and we treated it like the fables of the prophets she used to tell us. Now talking about the glossary, here wrinkled, having lines or folds, portrait, painting or picture, mantelpiece, a structure of wood, marble or stone above and around the fireplace. The thought was almost revolting. So it was very hard for the author to believe, that's why he says so. Now, revolting, unpleasant, absurd, illogical, undignified, disrespectful, fables, fictitious stories with a moral teaching, and prophets, of course, saints. Now, understanding the above passage that we have just read, the NCERT text was what I was actually detailing in the last slide. Now, let us understand. The author talks about his grandmother. He had known her for the past 20 years and she had always been old and wrinkled. Means since childhood he had been watching his grandma as so old only. He was told that she was once young and pretty and had a husband. His grandfather's portrait hung on the wall in which he wore loose-fitting clothes, a turban, and had a long white-colored beard that reached his chest. He also appeared very old, and the author thought that he was someone who could have many grandchildren but not a wife or children. The author could never imagine that once his grandmother was young and pretty. He could not connect to this idea. She used to tell him and his cousins about her childhood memories, like the games she used to play as a child. They found these stories illogical and disrespectful because it was beyond their imagination to think that grandmother was once a child and played such games. They thought that her life stories were like the other moral stories which she used to tell them. Now, further in the text, he says, she had always been short and fat and slightly bent. Her face was crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. No, we were certain she had always been, as we had known her, old, so terribly old, that she could not have grown older, and had stayed at the same age for 20 years. She could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. Now, talking about pretty and beautiful, students, you must understand, pretty is not the physical appearance, whereas, check, I would like to correct it. Pretty is talking about the physical appearance, but beautiful is the inner beauty of the heart. Okay, it's not only about the physical appearance. Now, further, she hobbled about the house in spotless white with one hand resting on her waist to balance a stool and the other hand telling the beads of her rosary. Her silver locks were scattered untidily over her pale, puckered face, and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. Yes, she was beautiful. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains, an expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. Now moving further, we understand the glossary. First, crisscross, a pattern of intersecting straight lines, hobbled, walked in an awkward way, unstable way also you can say, spotless white, she wore clean white colored dresses, stoop, bend one's body forward, rosary, beads of rosary, we are talking about a string of beads for keeping count of number of chants made of a religious prayer. In her case, because it was a Punjabi family and the grandma might be, chanting Vaheguru, Vaheguru, Vaheguru with that beads of rosary. Now, locks, hair, scattered, disorganized, untidily, not neat, puckered, a face contract into wrinkles. Most of the old people have this puckered face. Now, inaudible, unable to be heard. Serenity, the state of being peaceful and calm. An expanse of pure white serenity refers to the calm, relaxed and peaceful character of the author's grandmother. Contentment, a state of happiness and satisfaction. Well, now let's see the understanding of the above passage that we have read. His grandma was short, fat, slightly bent in posture, and her face had lots of wrinkles. She seemed so old, and she had been the same for the past 20 years. According to the author, she was beautiful but not pretty. She walked around the house in an awkward way, wearing spotless white clothes and beads of the rosary hanging from one hand, and the other hand rested on her back for support. She had silver-colored hair, which was not neatly combed and was disorganized. She was constantly chanting prayers. She compares her to the winter landscape in the mountains, which has a peaceful and calm feel. She was a live example of a pure white peace emitting entity. Peace emitting entity. This is how we can refer to her. Okay? Now, moving to the next portion of the text, Khushwant Singh says, my grandmother and I were good friends. My parents left me with her when they went to live in the city, and we were constantly together. She used to wake me up in the morning and get me ready for school. She said her morning prayer in a monotonous sing-song while she bathed and dressed me in the hope that I would listen to and get to know it by heart. I listened because I loved her voice but never bothered to learn it. Then she would fetch my wooden slate, which she had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk, a tiny earthen ink pot and a red pen, tie them in all in a bundle and hand it to me. After a breakfast of a thick stale chapati with a little butter and sugar spread on it, we went to school. She carried several stale chapatis with her for the village dogs. Let's understand the glossary in this context. Okay, monotonous, dull and boring, bothered, to be concerned, fetch, go for, and then bring back something for someone. To get also you can say, slate, a flat plate of slate formerly used for writing on in the schools. Earlier, most of the children in primary sections used to have that. Plastered, covered with a layer of plaster, earthen, made of baked or fiery clay. Now here it is, stale, no longer fresh and pleasant to eat, hard, musty or dry it can be. In old days, this was a regular pattern when there were no refrigerators. Most of the families had this kind of pattern of early breakfast in the morning, using the stale chapatis of leftover stuff in the time. Now, the author lived with her in the village. They were good friends. His parents left him with her to settle in the city. The author's grandmother used to wake him up every morning and get him ready for school. She would recite her morning prayers while she bathed and dressed him up, and he loved her voice but would not try to memorize a word of what she spoke. She would make his things ready, like a wooden slate, a tiny earthen ink pot, and a red pen. He would eat a thick stale chapati with butter and sugar spread on it. They both used to walk to school, and his grandmother carried a stale chapatis, with her to feed the village dogs on the way. Now, talking about the next portion of the text. My grandmother always went to school with me because the school was attached to the temple. The priest taught us the alphabet and morning prayer, while the children sat in rows on either side of the veranda singing the alphabet or the prayer in chorus. My grandmother sat inside reading the scriptures. Here he is talking about the religious scriptures. When we had both finished, we would walk back together. This time, the village dogs would meet at the temple door. They followed us to our home, growling and fighting with each other for the chapatis we threw to them. When my parents were comfortably settled in the city, they sent for us. That was a turning point in our friendship. Although we shared the same room, my grandmother no longer came to school with me. I used to go to an English school in a motor bus, so there were no dogs in the streets, and she took to feeding sparrows in the courtyard of our city house. So let's see the glossary. Scriptures, the sacred writings of a religion. You can say religious books. Growling, making a low guttural sound in the throat. Now this word is basically used for growling, howling, like dogs, etc. And courtyard. This is the a kind of structure, veranda. We cannot say veranda exactly, but yes, the courtyard, front yard, and backyard. Now, in the city life, urban structure, this has gone missing. Actually, in rural areas, most of the houses had the courtyard. Okay, fine. Let's see the next understanding of this text. His grandmother would accompany him to the school as the temple was attached to the school, and she used to visit the temple daily. On one side, he would sit on the veranda with the other children, would sing the alphabet and prayers in the chorus. On the other side, she would sit in the temple to read the scriptures. After finishing, they would walk back home together. The village dogs met them at the village door. They would follow them to their home, growling and fighting with each other for the stale chapatis that she fed them. When his parents got settled in the city, they called them. That was the turning point for his friendship with his grandmother. They shared the same room, but she no longer would give him company to his school. He started going to an English medium school, and a motor bus would come to pick and drop him. There were no dogs in the streets whom she could feed as she did in the village. So she started feeding sparrows in the veranda in their house. Now let's see the next portion of the text. The author says, as the years rolled by, we saw less of each other. Who is we here? The grandma and the author, KHUSHWANT SINGH. For some time, she continued to wake me up and get me ready for the school. When I came back, she would ask me what the teacher had taught me. I would tell her English words and settle things of Western science and learning. The law of gravity, Archimedes' principle, the world being round, etc. This made her unhappy. She could not help me with my lessons. She did not believe in the things they taught at the English school, and was distressed that there was no teaching about God and scriptures. One day, I announced that we were being given music lessons. She was very disturbed. To her, music had lewd associations. It was the monopoly of harlots and beggars, and not meant for gentlefolk. She said nothing, but her silence meant disapproval. She rarely talked to me after that. Let's understand the glossary here. Years rolled by, time passed, distressed, suffer from extremely sorrow, anxiety or pain. Lewd association, indecent or obscene or low grade association. Harlots, that is, people who are engaged in prostitution, and those who go for singing in the streets, etc. Now, gentlefolk, people of noble birth. Let's understand the above passage. As the years passed in the city, their interaction reduced. For some time, she continued to wake him up and would get him ready for the school. She would ask him what he had learnt in the school that day. The scientific terminology and English words made her unhappy. As she didn't know the language, she could not help him with the lessons. As his new school never taught him about God and religious scriptures, this made her sad. She did not approve of such an education. When she came to know that he was getting music lessons, it disturbed her. According to her, music was indecent and it was an art for the beggars and prostitutes and not for those belonging to decent families. She did not like that. He learned music. So she stopped talking to him. Now, talking about the text further, when I went up to university, I was given a room of my own. Now, here the schooling was over and university education. Then his father gave him a separate room for him for the study purpose. Okay, the common link, it means that was the room, okay, where both of them stayed. But then after he went to university, this common link of friendship was snapped. My grandmother accepted her seclusion with resignation. Seclusion, loneliness. Resignation, indifference we can call, we will discuss in the glossary also. She rarely felt her spinning wheel. Check. She rarely left her spinning wheel to talk to anyone. It means, now the author says that now she was, more or less always busy with her spinning wheel. From sunrise to sunset, she sat by her wheel spinning and reciting prayers. Only in the afternoon, she relaxed for a while to feed the sparrows. While she sat in the veranda, breaking the bread into little bits, hundreds of little birds collected around her, creating a veritable bedlam of chirrupings. Some came and perched on her legs, others on her shoulders. Some even sat on her head. She smiled and never shooed them away. She used to be the happiest half hour. This used to be happiest half hour of the day for her. Now, glossary. Snapped, break suddenly and completely. Seclusion, the state of being private and away from the people, accepted her seclusion with resignation. The grandmother accepted a lonely life as she accepted the separation from her grandson without objection. Spinning wheel, a household machine with a wheel attached to it for spinning yarn. A veritable bedlam of chirrupings refers to the noise and confusion caused by the chirrupings of the sparrows. Now, veritable used to describe something which is very interesting or unusual. Bedlam is confusion. Chirrupings, the noise of a small bird. Perched, alight or rest on something. Should, make a person or animal go away. Shooing. Fine. Now further, understanding the paragraph that we have read. As the author went to university, he had a room of his own. The common link of his friendship with his grandmother that they had when they shared the same room was changed now, and thus his friendship with her ended. She became more private and spent her whole day spinning wheel. From sunrise to sunset, she would sit silently recite her prayers. In her afternoon, she used to feed sparrows in the veranda. Breaking the bread into small pieces, she would feed hundreds of birds. The birds would gather around her. Some sat near her, some on her legs, some on her shoulders, and few on her head as well. She never shooed them, but always smiled. This was the happiest moment for her. She was the happiest in that half an hour during the whole day. Talking about the further text. When I decided to go abroad for further studies, I was sure my grandma would be upset. I would be away for 5 years, and at her age no one could tell. But my grandmother could. She was not even sentimental. She came to leave me at the railway station, but did not talk or show any emotion. Her lips moved in prayer. Her mind was lost in prayer. Her fingers were busy telling the beads of her rosary. Silently, she kissed my forehead, and when I left, I cherished the moist imprint as perhaps the last sign of physical contact between us. But that was not so. After 5 years, I came back home and was met by her at the station. She did not look a day older. She still had no time for words, and while she clasped me in her arms, I could hear her reciting her prayers. Even on the first day of my arrival, her happiest moments were with her sparrows, whom she fed longer, and with frivolous rebukes. Now let's see the glossary. Sentimental, a feeling of nostalgia, sadness or tenderness, an emotional feeling. Beads, a small piece of glass or stone threaded with others to make a rosary or a necklace. Now cherished, holds something dear. Moist, wet, imprint, impression or stamp. Clasp, hold tightly. Frivolous, not having any serious purpose. Light-hearted. So frivolous, rebuke is disapproval of something or someone scolding, you can think. Now frivolous rebukes, light-hearted scoldings. Okay. Next, moving to the understanding of this paragraph that we have read. When the author decided to go abroad for further studies, he believed it would be the last time. It might be, he thought that, okay, the last time he would see her, as he would be gone for 5 long years. As they all reached the station, she held him tightly and kissed his forehead. He thought it was the last physical contact with her. The wet impression of her hand was dear to him. She was not sentimental at all. When he came back after 5 years, she came to meet him at the station. She looked just the way she did 5 years ago, not a day older. She held him again in her arms and was still reciting her prayers. He noticed on the first day of his arrival that only sparrows would make her happy. Now, talking about the text further, he says, in the evening, a change came over her. She did not pray. She collected the women of the neighborhood, got an old drum, and started to sing. This was, welcoming the, loved ones coming from abroad. That was the ritual earlier. For several hours, she thumped and the sagging skins of the dilapidated drum and sang of the homecoming of warriors. We had to persuade her to stop to avoid overstraining. That was the first time since I had known her that she did not pray. The next morning, she was taken ill. It was a mild fever, and the doctor told us that it would go. But my grandmother thought differently. She told us that her end was near. She said that since only a few hours before the close of the last chapter of her life, she had omitted to pray, she was not going to waste any more time talking to us. Now this was something, very surprising for the whole family. So let's understand the glossary here. Thumped, hit, sagging, sinking downwards. Most of the old drums become like this. They are known as sagging drums. Dilapidated as well, in a state of despair or ruin. The sagging skins of dilapidated drum, the loose surface of the worn out drums. Dilapidated drum, you can say worn out drums as well. Now, persuade, to talk someone into doing something. Request. Okay, so the spelling request is correct. Request. Now it is correct. Okay, overstraining, overdoing something. Omitted, leave out or exclude something. Now let's understand the paragraph that we have read. An evening, she did not follow her regular routine of praying. Here it is not an, it's supposed to be in the evening. We are talking about that particular evening. So in the evening, that particular evening when the author came from abroad. So in the evening, she did not follow her regular routine of praying. She collected a few women from the neighborhood, got a drum and started singing with them. she thumped the ruined part of the drum and sang along. The whole family persuaded her to stop as she might get ill due to exertion. The next morning she fell ill. It was a mild fever. The doctors told them that it would go away, but she took it differently. According to her, she would die soon as her end was near. She started chanting prayers as she did not want to waste her last hours in talking to anyone. Now the text further says, we protested. We means the family of the author. Okay, but she ignored our protests. She lay peacefully in bed praying and telling her beads. Even before we could suspect, her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. A peaceful pallor spread on her face and we knew that she was dead. Let's see the glossary. Protested, express an objection against something or someone. Pallor, an unhealthy, pale, dull appearance. Okay. Now talking about the understanding of the text that we have read just now. The family protested, tried to stop her, but she lay peacefully on her bed, chanting prayers and doing her beads. Suddenly she stopped and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. A calm, pale appearance spread on her face and she was dead. The next portion of the text, the author says, we lifted her off the bed and as is customary, means this part of our custom in Hindu and Sikh families, laid her on the ground and covered her with a red shroud. Okay, after a few hours of mourning, we left her alone to make arrangements for her funeral. In the evening, we went to her room with a crude stretcher to take her to be cremated. The sun was setting and had lit her room and veranda with a blaze of golden light. We stopped halfway in the courtyard, all over the veranda and in her room, right up to where she lay dead and stiff wrapped in the red shroud. Thousands of sparrows sat scattered on the floor. There was no chirruping. We felt sorry for the birds and my mother fetched some bread for them. She broke it into little crumbs, the way my grandmother used to do, and threw it to them. The sparrows took no notice of the bread. When we carried my grandmother's corpse off, they flew away quietly. Now this behavior of the birds, goes on to say that, even the animals and birds understand these sad and happy emotions of human beings. Next morning, the sweeper swept the bread crumbs into the dustbin. Next morning, the sweeper swept the breadcrumbs into the dustbin. Now, this is what the story is. Okay, we are going to discuss the glossary of what we have covered just now. Customary is traditional. Crude is in a natural state or roughly made. Cremated, dispose of, or burn a body after it is dead. Blaze, a very large burning fire. Shroud, a piece of cloth used to wrap a dead body. Now, corpse, dead body of a human being. If it is an animal, then we call it a carcass. It is not corpse. But here it is a human body is dead, a dead human body, so corpse. Now, understanding the above paragraph that we have read, the family lifted her from the bed, laid her on the ground and wrapped her with a red colored cloth. Shroud is generally either red color or the white according to the custom. Thousands of sparrows sat silently near her. The author's mother fetched some bread for the birds, but they did not eat any. They flew away later as the family carried the dead body. The sweeper removed the crumbs the next morning. The birds were so sensitive. They did not want to eat bread but were mourning the death of the one who had fed them for so many days. That's what the story is. Okay. So that's all, dear students. For now, we'll meet you again with the question answers on this chapter in the next video. Thank you. Bye bye. And needless to say, if you like the presentation of the lesson, please do subscribe for it and like it. Thank you.